Right now, it is time for us to bring in David Tereshchuk. It is time for the Media Beat. David joins us on a Friday morning. He's got his own website, themediabeat.us. He is also a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. And your ears should have been ringing because I was talking about you a lot this week, David.
It's good to be a subject of a conversation as well as in conversation with you. Yeah, reporting in from New York City, the media capital of the world. But here I am. But glad to know I've been talked about in Connecticut.
Well, how can you not be talked about when I was watching what was unfolding in England and I just thinking about all the conversations we've had about Brexit and the Halloween exit and the no deal Brexit exit, and it all just blew up in a giant mushroom cloud this week.
Didn't it just? Yes. And I know Jill is so fond of her nickname. Well, it's now a much shared nickname for Boris Johnson, our new Prime Minister, Bojo. I'm sure she must be distressed to find that Jojo has left the scene. Boris Johnson has a younger brother, a minister in the government, indeed. And he's walked out feeling a great conflict between what he describes as family loyalty on the one hand and the interests of the nation on the other. So, yes, it's getting almost. I mean, in many ways it's very confusing. It's chaotic, but there are elements even of Greek tragedy about it, with a family split down the middle inside the British Parliament. Indeed, until yesterday, inside the British government, until Jojo left that government.
I was watching. This was. Let's put it this way. I actually put on BBC America, not just the regular BBC America, but I put on BBC America, the news channel, okay? I watched probably 3.5 to 4 hours of what went on. And
you were watching the live Parliament stream?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's been an extraordinary show of Parliament's role. You know, the Borowitz report, of course, from the New Yorker,
Yes.
One of their regular satirical pastiches of the news. But they had a great piece this week, basically riffing off the idea of the American public, astonished to see a legislative body doing its job of tackling an executive that was at odds with what the Parliament wanted to see, and the Parliament doing its job of blocking it. Yes, the UK Parliament, what we rather arrogantly in Britain have always called the mother of parliaments, doing its job of well, as many of its members see that job, at least, of ensuring that the Prime Minister does not get his way in arranging an exit from the European Union by October 31st, whether or not they have negotiated a deal, a divorce agreement, if you like, between Britain and the European Union. So, yeah. Parliament's flexing its muscles, and it's quite a sight.
Now, also something that surprised me, which I wasn't really, is the House of Lords separate from Parliament?
Parliament embraces two houses.
Okay,
Our equivalent of the House of the House of Representatives and the Senate is the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So legislation traces a course very similar to the American course. Matters will be debated first in the House of Commons. They'll vote on the upcoming legislation. If it's passed, it then goes to what's known as the upper house. It's upper, but it doesn't have more power. In fact, in a way, it has less power, generally speaking. But it does have to ratify anything that's passed from the Commons. That's the House of Lords' main job, in fact, to ensure that a new law passes from being an act of the House of Commons into a wholesale parliamentary act of law.
That's something I learned from watching the several hours because I noticed the difference. Now, so what happened in the House of Lords? Did it follow along with what happened?
It did. The Conservatives have a kind of inbuilt majority in the governing party. That is, the Conservatives have an inbuilt historic majority in the House of Lords, but that's shrinking as time goes on. The majority owes its the Lords being what some suggest a House of peers, lords of the realm, Lord this and Lord that, which has been appointed by the king and tend to be, historically at least, have tended to be landed gentry, people who own bits of the country scattered across the land. And they are diminishing in number now, thanks mainly to the Blair Labour government in the 90s and 2000s. There are fewer and fewer. The practice of hereditary peerages like that has been banished, and more members of the House of Lords are appointed by the two political parties. So the traditionalist flavor of the House of Lords is fading in favor of sort of a technocratic generation now. But there is still an inbuilt conservative majority. However, the government saw that it wasn't worth trying to enact that, trying to energize that and make it a blockage. They, with not very good grace, declined to flex those muscles there, those authoritarian muscles, and the House of Lords saw a lot more sense in, as you say, just following along with the view of the Commons. So it's passed. Law will now move on and get the final touch in law of the land when the Queen does, which is sign it. And it is, it's often said that Britain has a constitution. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have very clear shape. The Queen will sign this, like she's signed every single piece of legislation that does go through Commons and the Lords, and indeed, it's argued that, well, she could do something different. Well, yeah, she could, but not a single monarch in Britain has ever not signed one of those acts that has come through Parliament. Not since I believe 1704. So it would be quite something if the Queen didn't go along with Parliament in these matters.
You're cutting in and out this morning. What I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to call you on your telephone. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to try that.
You're having one of those mornings, aren't you?
It's just I'm just having a terrible morning here. So I'm going to try to reach you by that. We'll see what happens here. See if I do this right. See if I do this right here.
Mornings for communication.
Oh. It's an unbelievable. It's kind of what just went on here this morning is kind of what happened in the U.S. government and British government over the past couple of days. It's just been.
Well, we're talking about chaos. We may as well have chaos in our own midst.
And so the main question, because sadly your exquisite explanation of what happened in the non-muscle, the choice to not flex that muscle in the Lords got totally in and out. So what I'm just going to do in a different way.
Well, suffice it to say that the Lords went along with the Commons, and the Queen will go along with both houses because it's what she's always done, and all monarchs have since 1704. She'll sign the bill. It will become an act of law, and Boris is not getting his way because of Parliament.
And what is the law that is being enacted, or that will be signed?
Well,
hello.
Well, yes, okay. There's a certain clarity to it, at least, as long as you can bear the details. The law says now that Prime Minister Boris Johnson cannot enact the exit from Europe without returning to the European Union to negotiate one more time. He can't do it without a deal, in other words. He
All
can
right.
do it.
Basically,
That's not wiped off the board, but he must get an agreement before he does it.
All right,
An
now-
agreement with the European Union itself.
Is Halloween off the table?
yes.
No, that date still remains there, and he must do this negotiation before Halloween, October 31st.
Okay, so bottom line, if and I've been waiting for any media person to ask these questions, so glad you're here, and sorry that it fell to me. Bottom line.
No, you're the best questioner on this matter. You've been following it very assiduously.
Yeah, and
Yeah, but the bottom line is that
the bottom line is he still has to negotiate with or his people who are already there have to negotiate with these, with the EU.
In theory, his people have been having meetings with the European Union twice a week while all this has been going on. He has said that those negotiations are proving to be very fruitful. The European side says nothing's happening. Nothing's changing. The Brits aren't moving, and we don't see any need to move. But now he will like to, whether he likes it or not, he's going to have to move.
But as we discussed last week, and I don't think this has changed very much, having had just a teeny bit of experience, well, what you referred to as the Good Friday Agreement. The thing is,
on the Northern Ireland angle, yeah.
Well, simply that these things tend to not get resolved until the 11th and a half hour. So how?
That is generally speaking very true. Yeah.
So, there's a bit of a sideshow going on. I'm just wondering, where does one find out what's really going? Sideshow's the wrong word, but
there's no sideshow.
There's no sideshow. You're right.
What the show that's going on, and this is the great thing. If people were to take time and watch a couple hours a night if they're interested in this, of what went on in the Parliament and the House of Lords, is that you'll see this is a matter of trust about anything Boris Johnson will do. That's what this is about.
Right.
This is not about Brexit standing by
My
itself.
point is the following. Yeah. There are there's all sorts of stuff going on that no one is privy to except for the people who are doing it.
But this is just about lack of trust in Boris Johnson
Well,
himself.
yeah,
That's
but
all
I
it
mean,
is.
Politics, if you watch any of our cable channels, you will see each one actively trying to foment distrust in what the other person is doing to a point of absolute paralysis.
But it's very rare you see one party show the utmost distrust in its own party, and then kick 21 people out. No, that's what this. That's what
the
this
fun
is all.
part.
Well, I say, but that's
yeah.
I mean,
that's true. I mean, the divisions at work now are essentially: can we believe anything that Boris Johnson says? And similarly, and I say similarly in the sense that this applies both to Boris Johnson's formal political opponents, and indeed to people within his own party. And it is an extraordinary sight to see, a score or more of veteran conservative politicians, some of them very senior, some of them previously household names in the country because they were ministers in previous governments, very senior ministers, some very long-standing people. A member of Parliament who happens to be Winston Churchill's grandson and has been in Parliament for, I think, 37 years, has been expelled from the party. This shows a lack of trust within the party in its own leadership, enacted by, of course, the Prime Minister's own lack of trust in his own people. Lack of trust and total disdain for many people are saying. I mean, the man is universally acknowledged to be just so brutally intent on ensuring his own survival. Now, whether it's tactically a good move to ensure that survival is another question entirely. He may fall, as they say in Britain, or he may come a complete cropper if he gets what he wants, which is a nationwide general election, because he's so angry. That's the main reason why he's doing it. I'll get my own back is his thinking. He may well not get his own back. He may lose that national election. It's very in this very febrile atmosphere. It's very hard to know what the outcome of a national election taken now would be.
Right, and then it would be. That merits much more than a right and a quick change to the other side, because you don't know what the outcome. You can assume through your lens what the outcome will be, but you actually don't know what it will really be, and you will have
right. And many of us assumed in 2016 that the general referendum, when we asked the entire nation what it thought about Brexit itself, the very thing that started all this mess, most people got that wrong. The lens didn't show the correct outcome at all. Just as in 2016 in this country, many people were taken completely by surprise by the Trump victory. In many ways, it's a very similar process taking place.
And then you've got the problem where, except by the same people who got it horribly wrong, there is less love for the leader of the Labour Party than it's not like
sure.
You're dealing with
The Labour Party is not in a very strong position to go into a nationwide election either, and the very similar splits are at work there. There's a principal split rather. There's a principal split about how strongly people feel tied to the European Union. There are Eurosceptics, as are known amongst the Labour Party, just as there are in the Conservative Party. And that issue is in fact just one of several that make Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, a very unstable leader at the moment. Because there's a very good chance that he would lose this general election, which could otherwise be his to win, and Boris's to lose. But we just won't know. And the date of that election, if it happens, I think we're on course for a general election, come hell or high water. But when it happens is the crucial question, and when it happens, we have no way right now of knowing who is most likely to win.
And how is that sorted out? Not who's going to win, but when can an election be called? How much time do you need?
Generally speaking, it very differently from America, from the United States. It's a 3-week period. Once an election is declared, it has to take place within 3 weeks. It's a very short campaign period compared with America.
So basically, in theory, Alex could throw the... All right, and how do you trigger an election?
In normal events, the Prime Minister just chooses the date. Right. That's one of the strange extra powers that the Prime Minister has that even some very powerful chief executives of countries don't have elsewhere. He can't do. The President of the United States can't just snap his fingers and say, "Let's have a nationwide election." But generally speaking, the British Prime Minister has always been able to do that. However, there is now on the British Statute Book a fixed-term Parliament Act, as it's known, which in fact means that short of a real major parliamentary crisis in which there is a majority in the Parliament who pass an actual vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, which does automatically trigger a general election. The situation now is that Parliament has to agree with a majority of 2/3 with the Prime Minister who wants to call an election suddenly out of time. The Parliaments normally last 5 years, so we got plenty of time before the next, in the normal run of events kind of election. But if a prime minister wants to call a snap election, he does need this two-thirds majority, which he failed to get this week, amongst all the other defeats that he suffered in Parliament.
Which might be why I asked that.
He hasn't won one
Of
vote
course,
yet.
yeah.
Right. But but my question is, are we hurtling down the no confidence road? Don't throw me in the briar patch, Don't throw me in the briar patch, Brer Rabbit.
Yes. I mean, altogether, and I know journalists are fond of saying that a messy situation is chaos, but I think we are pretty well in a chaotic situation. And it's going to take some extraordinary calmness at the center of the storm to ensure anything like a sensible outcome. And there's not a lot of calmness around at the moment, not a commodity that's in great supply.
And in the last couple minutes, but what would a sensible outcome look like? Well,
it depends where you're standing, where you're looking at it from. I think people who've wanted Parliament to exercise the kind of confident constitutional role that it has attempted to do this week, the people who would have wanted that to be happening a long time ago, would have hoped for constraints put on the Prime Minister before now, and all of this laid out before this last-minute flurry. So, I mean, I'm sorry to be taking the old-fashioned way out of that question by saying I wouldn't be starting from here if you asked me how to get to such and such a place. But now that we're here, it's extremely hard to see how anything like an orderly exit from Europe is at all possible now. It looks like we're going to be hurtling towards a no deal by the 31st. There will be so much rancor in Parliament that we might well get a snap election. Now, whether it happens before 31st of October or soon afterwards, in the end, in the long run, of course, is irrelevant. And what we will see is a great high-stakes gamble taken by the Prime Minister, and he may or he may not win that. That's an unsatisfying answer, I know, but that's the way it's going to go from now.
Well, at least we can safely say, watch this space.
Yeah, I don't think anything's going to happen.
Absolutely.
I don't think anything really, and I think you're right, I don't think anything is going to happen until you reach that magic date. But see, at that then the European
Union. It has
Union,
to happen before.
But the European Union holds all the cards. They're the ones that can decide really what happens here.
Well, and that's there's an argument for, just if you are if you're playing the chess game, there's an argument for saying, well, I'll just knock all my pieces off the board. Well, you can use yours though.
Yeah.
So and this is where it does go back, and people just really have to understand that there's all sorts of toing and froing, what I'll call behind the scenes, that no one sadly has any clue about.
Well,
that's absolutely true.
I'll
say one thing in conclusion, and it's actually to shift change the subject entirely. But no matter all the fuss that's sort of preoccupying journalists in Europe and in North America, especially the hurricane bashing the eastern seaboard of North America right now, I hope that journalistic attention won't be diverted entirely to the major statesman, if that's the right word for him, dying in Africa. Robert Mugabe passed away overnight in Singapore, a place where he's been going for medical assistance and many surgeries over a couple of decades now. But at long last, this towering figure of despotism in southern Africa is dead. And I hope that journalism, generally speaking, in our countries will take due account of his passing, but also of the fact that he was at one time a very, very strong and impressive democratic leader, a freedom fighter, in other words. Let's that not be forgotten about him. I knew Robert Mugabe when he was in prison, not as long as Nelson Mandela, 11 years to Mandela's 27 years, and what a time when that man was a highly principled, individual with ideals. And what power did to him, and of course did to his country, almost ruined it completely,
Right.
Is a shame, a desperate shame. But at one time, that man had principles.
If people want to see that covered here, they can go to the BBC news site because they've got.
If they want to see it covered here, but the point is they've got to go and look at British or.
Yeah.
If you want to see it covered here, you've got to go look outside.
You can see how a once great and powerful man was humbled and ruined by the power.
Or corrupted, because what David is reminding me of is back when you heard his name linked with, let's say, the good guys. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
As they say, thank you very much, David Tereshchuk, the Media Beat.